Good morning, everyone. I don't know what the sermon title today, if you saw it, that it's overwhelmed is the name of this message. Wasn't sure what kind of thoughts that may stir in you, and I was going to try to at least give you some kind of a definition before we get started, because there's many ways I think that this can be looked at. But that was one overwhelmed little lamb there. And I think that was probably about as good of an illustration as maybe we are going to get this morning. When we get faced with something that we just don't quite know what to do with. And, blessings on that little lamb till it finally makes its way back to its home. But to be overwhelmed, I'm going to now give you more of a technical definition, is that when things pour down upon us, in a way that we feel like we can't control what's happening, like it's coming too fast, it's too powerful. With the news that many places in the world right now are experiencing devastating weather, you can get a pretty good idea of what kind of overwhelm that might be. Farmers who may have already been struggling with low grain prices, having their entire grain bins submerged in water, and wondering where they'll find a way to make it through. Or families that have been stricken by a cyclone that basically destroyed an entire community, more like city. We can feel helpless and powerless. And the root meaning of the word overwhelm is to overturn. So when you come up against those times in your life where it feels like this is the tipping point, you can just feel the whole thing starting to roll, like when you're going over in a canoe, and you can't stop it, you can't get your balance. It's overwhelming. There's different ways in which you can feel that sense of overwhelm. As a family with 5 children, which Louie and I have 5 children, I identify with what you were talking about, Andy, your family. I remember 10 years of diapers. That can feel a little overwhelming at times. But I want to focus on a specific kind of overwhelm that has to do with when we have too much on our plate. And you referenced that a little bit too, Andy. When you have so many things coming at you at work, let's say, and you're not quite sure how you're going to get them done. You have reports that are due. Those of you that are college students, you understand what overwhelm is at times when you're coming up to the semester break or the end of the semester with finals. It's too much to handle in too little of time. We just have too much on our plates. You know how that goes, the conversation. We often will say, well, how was your week? And the person oftentimes the answer that I say and the answer that I hear is, oh, it's been so busy. I've been busy, busy, busy. And there's times in which that gets to us so much and causes us enough stress that we say, I can't wait till it's over, till we can get past the Advent season, till we can get past Lent and past Easter. You don't think pastors ever have that thought? But do we listen to ourselves when we say that? I can't wait till it's over. I mean, imagine that on our tombstone. He's certainly glad now. That's how we go around right now, it seems, in our overwhelm and that busyness. But we can also feel overwhelmed when we don't have enough. When we can't get our bank account to stretch to the next paycheck. When we think we would never, ever do a payday loan and wonder if maybe we need to this time. We don't have enough resources when we're overwhelmed with things like flooding or things like trauma. And that sense of overwhelm can become traumatic when we experience something that just absolutely takes away our ability to even respond. We often don't know that kind of helplessness. Nothing that we can do is going to stop what is happening. The context of Isaiah here in chapter 55 is written to a people who are going to be much more on the side of overwhelmed by having too much on their plate. The Israelites have been in exile for some time, and they're getting a little bit comfortable. Maybe we could call it when we are comfortably overwhelmed. We might not be experiencing a real serious flood, but we can still feel overwhelmed in our comfortable life. They were getting so comfortable that the writer here in Isaiah needs to get them to pay attention. It says to incline your ear. It begins with this first word of ho. It's like, hey, I have something to say. It would be like one congregation where I had attended. Well, I was a transition pastor there, and we had such difficulty getting people to pay attention, to get them into Sunday school, because we had such a warm fellowship time. Whoever was in charge of the Christian ed just suffered through those Sundays, because they would go through ringing a cowbell, ho, hey, it's time for Sunday school, and still half the people wouldn't show up. They would just stay over there with the coffee. And there's a reason for that, and we'll get to that as we go on here. So everyone who's thirsty, would you pay attention? Come and drink at the waters. But the response sounds like, as you look at this passage, as though nobody's really paying attention. Maybe like, well, I'm not really that thirsty. Should I be worried about that? Now, we know what real thirst is. I mean, you can imagine some times when you've come across that. For those of you who roof houses, when you roof a house in Kansas in the summertime, yeah, we get pretty thirsty when we do that. You walk 18 holes of golf in the hot Kansas sun, you'll be pretty thirsty by the end of 9. You have to change a tire on the edge of the freeway and feel all the heat from the asphalt while you're doing it. If you don't have water along, you're going to need it pretty shortly. Or if you drove an overheating van in 100-degree heat with a heater on full blast so that you wouldn't overheat the engine and become disabled, all the crayons melted into the carpet, and all we were left with were these little paper, colorful tubes. Still perfect-looking crayons, no crayon wax in them at all. We know what that kind of thirst is. Now, there's another kind of thirst that we're not always aware of. The Mennonite Church USA Convention, forget exactly which year it was held in Phoenix somewhat recently. We were there sitting outside. There was a thermometer, a big digital thermometer there. It said it was 118 degrees. But we're sitting there in the shade and we felt quite comfortable. But we must have looked a little out of place because a police officer was walking by and he said, "Do you have water with you?" And we said, "No, we're not thirsty. Why?" He said, "You need to keep drinking." He said, "This kind of heat is really dangerous. Make sure that you have water with you, especially if you're going to walk any kind of distance." If you go out into the trails around Phoenix and Tucson, they have signs that'll warn you about that. They'll give you a nice illustration of what heat exhaustion looks like and sunstroke and what to do if those should occur. And there's even one sign that says, "Stop, drink water. You are thirsty whether you realize it or not." In this passage, as we get further down into Isaiah, God says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways." And I had to think of that policeman. As he walked away, he probably looked back at us and thought that. My thoughts aren't your thoughts. I know what people like you look like when they get into trouble and they're dehydrated. I'm trying to keep you from looking like that. The Israelites did not know that they were thirsty. They were starting to get pretty comfortable. So with this declaration to come to the table, this, come, it made me wonder how many of you, when you were growing up, had some kind of call to your family dinner? How many of you can remember a specific thing that might have been done to call you to the table? So I just wonder how. Did any of you remember, especially, now this would be if you have a Pennsylvania Dutch Amish background like I do. My mom, when right around 5:30, 6 o'clock, when dinner time came, she would say, "Bella Essa." Any of you remember that? Bella Essa. Essa is eat, and Bella is want to. Want to eat. You want to come and eat? Bella Essa. That's the sense of this. Anyone who's thirsty can come. It's open to every individual. Come and satisfy your hunger and your thirst with the richest of foods and the finest of drink. But I'm not quite sure the Israelites quite got that. The theologian and Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann points out that they probably had gotten used to the bread of the empire. Now remember, I want to give them a little bit of grace here. Before they went into exile, they were told, you're going to be there. The Lord told them, you're going to be there a long time. So when you get there, it's okay to make it your home. You can build houses, you can plant vineyards, and you should. You should build your community. Live your lives, because it's going to be some generations before you make it back out. So I'm not going to fault them for making this their home, but as Brueggemann points out, had they forgotten that they were actually in exile? They were told to seek the welfare of the city, and in turn there'd be a promise, you will find your own welfare. And maybe they had found such good welfare that they weren't all that cracked about leaving. In some cases anyway. Babylon may have started to feel like home. Do you ever think about using that word for where we live? That we live in an empire? That we live in one of the most powerful countries the world has ever known? That has been able to dominate globally with its military and its wealth? Have we gotten so used to the bread and the wine of empire that we have forgotten that this is really not our home? It was a fact that the Israelites were exiled. We have ancestors that had to flee their own type of persecution, but we've been relatively free of that for generations. We almost have to choose that mindset that, we are really in exile too. This is not the home that's ultimately going to satisfy us. I think of living nearly 20 years, though, when my extended family experienced no deaths. You can get used to death not being a part of this life. But I'm old enough now that we're starting to find out that this is impossible to hang on to as your home. That there are parts of this life that don't ultimately satisfy us. I came across some really interesting research this week that had to do with stress, because I think overload and stress kind of go together, overwhelm and stress. We know that stress is harmful to our bodies, right? That it triggers adrenaline, it triggers cortisol, all good things that help us in our intensity and ability to focus and even our strength so that we can handle what is coming at us, at least as best our physical bodies can. But we also know that if we live in that stress, it starts to harm our heart. It starts to harm our arteries. But there is some relatively new research that is showing that there is also ways in which when we share our burdens with others and when we step in to the burdens of other people and help carry them, oxytocin is released in our system, that their learning is combating the effects of what stress does and actually turns stress into something that isn't really harmful. But they only see it where there's a relationship, where we're sharing with others. It relaxes our arteries, our heart, it lowers our blood pressure, it makes us feel good, and it makes us feel courageous. Even just the act of opening the door for somebody will release oxytocin in your bloodstream. A smile that is met with a smile releases oxytocin in your bloodstream. And so I have a question. Is part of what Isaiah reminding us of that we really find our sense of peace in coming to God and coming together as a community? That when we are overwhelmed because we have too much on our plate, then maybe we need to think about how we share with those who don't have enough on theirs. So I think that's the banquet that Isaiah is inviting people to. It's a table that is spread, that is overflowing with mercy, and it says that there is abundance of pardon. And if you don't feel worthy to sit at that table, all of this fine food and this fine drink, it doesn't cost you anything. It's been paid for already. And you were just invited to come. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, come to the table and feast on the richest food and the finest drink. There's another aspect of this I just want to end with to mention, is that when we have too much on our plate and we do make that effort to share with someone else, we build our community. And it also starts to put our trust in God. But what I would really like to see at this table and at this feast is when we can share with open hands, in the sense that I know I have plenty for myself for the next year, so I'll share this with you. Because I know if I keep working, I'll make this back up. See, it's still kind of me-centered. But this kind of sharing is more like, I know I have enough for the next year. I want to share this with you. And I don't know if I can make that back up again, but I'm trusting that God will take care of us. And that if I find myself in the position of being somebody with not enough, that somebody that has too much on their plate will share with me. When we start getting that reciprocity going, that, I think, is the beauty of where we begin to have the overwhelm that comes from having too much on our plate, together with the overwhelm when you don't have enough, and you sit at the table, overflowing with mercy, that abounds with pardon. That's when we say, Ho, come, all you who thirst, come to the waters. Or as my mother would say, Bella Essa.